You wake up to an alarm. You check your phone. You commute. You work. You scroll. You collapse into bed, exhausted. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you imagine your ancient ancestors had it worse. Hunting all day. Starving half the time. Fighting for survival every waking hour. But the real answer is far stranger. Ancient humans, for most of their existence, worked less than you do right now. Not a little less, dramatically less. Let that sit for a moment. For decades, the story you were told went something like this. Life before agriculture was brutal, nasty, short, a constant grind against hunger and death. Anthropologists even had a name for it, borrowed from the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who imagined prehistoric life as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It became the default assumption. Cavemen struggled every hour just to eat. Then, in the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Lee decided to actually check. He traveled to the Kalahari Desert to study the Juhuansi people, a hunter-gatherer group whose lifestyle closely mirrored that of ancient humans. He expected to find a population on the edge of starvation, spending nearly every waking hour searching for food. Instead, he found something that upended everything. The adults worked on average around 15 hours a week to meet their nutritional needs. 15 hours, less than 2 hours a day. The rest of the time, rest, storytelling, socializing, naps in the shade. Lee published his findings, and another anthropologist, Marshall Sahlins, took the data and ran with it. In 1966, Sahlins coined a phrase that still echoes through anthropology departments today. He called hunter-gatherer societies the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had more stuff. Affluent because they had more time. Their wants were few, and their environment met those wants without demanding endless labor in return. Why does this feel so wrong to you? Because everything about modern life tells you that comfort comes from accumulation. More money, more possessions, more hours logged, but your ancient ancestors measured wealth differently. They measured it in leisure. So what did they actually do with their day? Picture this. Morning light breaks over the savannah. A small group wakes, not to an alarm, but to the natural rhythm of the sun. Some head out to gather. Roots, berries, tubers, nuts. Foraging made up the bulk of daily food, and in most hunter-gatherer societies, it was remarkably reliable. Hunting large game happened, but it was often a bonus, not the backbone of survival. Meat was prized, celebrated, shared widely when it came in. But the daily calories, the dependable ones, mostly came from plants gathered by people who knew their landscape intimately, and that knowledge was staggering. A hunter-gatherer might recognize hundreds of plant species. Which ones healed? Which ones poisoned? Which ones ripened in which season, in which exact patch of land? This wasn't guesswork. It was a database, memorized and passed down, more precise in some ways than a modern grocery store aisle. Once the gathering was done, usually within a few hours, the rest of the day opened up. This is where the story gets even stranger. Anthropologist James Suzman, who spent years living among the Juhuansi, described their culture as one built around abundant free time. People napped, they visited neighboring camps. They told stories that stretched for hours, weaving cosmology, gossip, and humor into a single fireside performance. Music happened, dancing happened, arguments happened, resolved through conversation rather than escalation, because in a small, interdependent group, holding a grudge was expensive. Children didn't go to school in the way you understand it. They learned by watching, by playing, by tagging along on gathering trips and mimicking the adults around them. Play itself was the curriculum. A child throwing a stick was practicing a hunting motion. A child pretending to track an animal's footprints in the dirt was learning to read the land. There was structure to it, though. Not the structure of a clock, but the structure of a season. Certain months meant certain foods ripened. Certain rains meant certain animals migrated through certain valleys. A hunter-gatherer's calendar wasn't written down. It lived in memory, in the position of stars, in the behavior of birds, in which trees flowered first. Missing a signal could mean a missed opportunity that wouldn't return for a year, so attention mattered enormously. But attention isn't the same as labor. You can watch the sky while resting. You can notice a bird's flight path while lying in the shade. Much of what looked like idleness to outside observers was actually a kind of quiet vigilance, tuned finely to a world that rewarded noticing over grinding. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, studying the Hadza people of Tanzania, added another wrinkle to this picture. She found that older members of the group, grandmothers especially, played an outsized role in feeding the community. Her research, now known as the grandmother hypothesis, suggested that postmenopausal women spent long hours digging tubers and sharing them with grandchildren, freeing up younger mothers to have more children sooner. Survival wasn't just an individual hustle, it was a distributed system, where the very old and the very young were woven into the food supply, not sidelined from it. Nobody was working alone toward their own survival. Everyone's labor, however light, fed into everyone else's. This distributed effort meant nobody had to work themselves into exhaustion. If one person came back empty-handed, the group didn't go hungry because food was shared, not hoarded. That single fact changes the entire psychology of labor. You don't grind desperately when you know that even a bad day is covered by your neighbors, and that your good days will one day cover theirs. Compare that to the isolation many people feel today, where a missed paycheck or a lost job can unravel an entire life with no safety net waiting underneath. Ancient scarcity was real, but it was rarely faced alone. Here's the counterintuitive twist. This wasn't a primitive lifestyle waiting to be improved by agriculture. In many ways, agriculture made things worse before it made things better. When humans transitioned to farming, something unexpected happened to their bones. Skeletal remains from early agricultural societies show a measurable decline in height and health compared to their hunter-gatherer predecessors. Diets narrowed. Instead of hundreds of wild food sources, people leaned on a handful of staple crops. Disease spread faster in crowded settlements, working hours increased, agriculture required constant labor, planting, weeding, harvesting, storing, defending the harvest from rivals and rot alike. So why did humans switch? If foraging offered more leisure and often better nutrition, why trade it for a harder life? The honest answer is that nobody fully agrees. Population pressure, climate shifts that made reliable foraging harder in certain regions. The simple fact that farming, even if it demanded more hours, could feed more mouths per square mile. Once one group settled and grew in number, neighboring groups often had little choice but to follow, whether they wanted to or not. It wasn't a single, better choice made all at once. It crept in, generation by generation, until there was no path back. There's a strange irony hiding in this shift. Farming was supposed to be the technology that freed humans from hunger. Instead, for the first several thousand years of its existence, it often tied people more tightly to hunger than ever before. A single failed harvest could wipe out an entire settlement's food supply for a year in a way that foraging across dozens of different plant and animal species rarely could. Diversity, it turns out, is a form of insurance. A hunter-gatherer with 100 backup food sources could absorb the loss of a few. A farmer with 2 staple crops had no such cushion. And yet, once the shift happened, there was no undoing it. Farming supported denser populations, and denser populations meant more soldiers, more traders, more builders, more people who could outcompete and eventually absorb their foraging neighbors. It wasn't that farming made life better for the individual right away. It made groups larger and harder to displace, and size, in the long run, won. Which brings you to something worth sitting with. Your body and mind were shaped by roughly 300,000 years of that older rhythm. Short bursts of purposeful effort, long stretches of rest, conversation, and play. Only the last few thousand years, a blink in evolutionary terms, have looked anything like your current schedule. And only the last 100 or so have looked like sitting at a desk under artificial light for 8 or 9 hours straight. This is the modern mirror. When you feel drained after a long day of meetings that produced nothing you can point to, that's not weakness, it's a mismatch. Think about your own week. How many hours do you spend physically doing something versus simply being present at a job, available, watched, waiting? Your ancestors' 15 hours were 15 hours of direct and tangible output. Yours might stretch to 40 or 50, and a good portion of that is presence without production, a performance of busyness rather than the thing itself. It's not that you're lazier than a Jew/Huansi forager, it's that the shape of your labor changed into something your evolved instincts don't recognize as complete no matter how many hours you log. Your ancestors' version of a workday ended with a fish, a bundle of tubers, a story told well enough to be repeated the next night, something tangible, something finished. Modern work often ends with an inbox that simply refills itself by morning, a task list that never actually empties, a sense of motion without arrival, even your instinct to nap, to crave unstructured time with people you trust, to feel most alive around a fire or a shared meal, isn't a modern indulgence. It's an inheritance. It's what an ancient human day was mostly made of. None of this means you should abandon your job and forage for berries in a nearby park. The world you live in runs on different rules now, and there's no simple undoing of 10,000 years of history, but there's something worth borrowing from that older rhythm. The idea that rest isn't a reward you earn after enough labor. It's a baseline your body still expects. The idea that a short, focused burst of effort, followed by genuine recovery, might actually be closer to how humans are built to function than a long, thin smear of half attention stretched across 9 hours. So the next time you imagine a caveman, trade the image of a starving man, clutching a spear for something closer to the truth. A person who worked a few hours, then spent the rest of the afternoon in the shade, laughing with people who knew every detail of his life, not because he had nothing better to do, because he already had everything he needed. You check your phone again, you have 30 more emails to answer today, Somewhere behind that instinct to keep grinding is a much older voice, quietly asking why you never stop to rest in the shade.